If everyone agrees that these are illegal strikes, why does he still have his job?
Depending on whether you believe this is a real war, arguably either a war crime or murder. The extent to which the reaction has been partisan is really disturbing. And that's why this thing needs to be made public.
Hi, everybody. Welcome into Sanity with Dave Riggs and Allison Camerata. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. You're going to want to hear this conversation today with the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. You know him. He's Congressman Jim Himes. Dave, that was a great conversation. He told us a lot of stuff, some behind the scenes stuff about what's been happening on Capitol Hill. He also talked about Donald Trump's socialist tendencies and his true feelings about Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. We also, of course, as the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, we talked to him about the video he saw. Now, most of Congress has not seen the second strike video. Congressman Himes has. What he saw on that, how his Republican colleagues reacted, of course, the legality of these boat strikes in the first place. And he does address the 53% of Americans who do want us to destroy the boats of drug dealers off the coast of Venezuela. So it's a huge conversation, but we start with the biggest story in the country, which is, of course, the second strike on that drug boat.
Congressman, always great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sanity. Just explain to us where we are with these deadly boat strikes and with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. If everyone agrees, I mean, I've read lots of legal scholars that these are illegal strikes, why is the Secretary of Defense still able to do them, and does he still have his job?
All right. Well, let's start with that last question first. As anybody who has watched whether the Trump administration, either in Trump 1 or Trump 2, will impose accountability on anyone on the team, we know the answer to that question, right? So, I mean, I'm sorry to say this because Pete Hegseth has one of the most challenging, difficult, and arguably consequential jobs on the planet, for which he is completely overmatched. But he's not going anywhere until the president feels like he's taken up too much of the air in the room, right? Now, my sense is that he may be on a little bit of thin ice just because he's, squeezing the boss out of the headlines time and again with the Signalgate scandal and now this boat strike. So, I mean, again, this is the nature of this administration. Nobody gets held accountable for terrible things, regardless of what they do. In fact, the president, I mean, you didn't go here, but, while the president is ordering the killing of, low-level drug people in the Caribbean, he's pardoning a major figure in cocaine trafficking, the former president of Honduras. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up, but it speaks to the accountability and the lack of accountability and the lack of ethics in this administration. But yeah, look, these, in this building, in the Congress, in a bipartisan way, people are very concerned about these boat strikes. My hope is that the video that we're talking about here is made public. As you may know, legislation is out there to require it being made public because people need to see what their military is doing. This storied institution, basically wasted two guys who were clinging to wreckage in the middle of the Caribbean, which, is depending on whether you believe this is a real war, arguably either a war crime or murder, if you don't believe it's a real war. So, I mean, these are consequential things, and the visual when it comes out is not going to be a comfortable one for most people.
Do you think it will come out? You saw the video. We know how you reacted. How do your Republican colleagues, how did they react in real time? Because they have defended it, those who saw it.
Yeah, one of the things that's really troubling here is the extent to which the reaction to the video, and I've watched a lot of these videos over the years, made me nauseous. The extent to which the reaction has been partisan is really disturbing. And that's why this thing needs to be made public. Because, when my Republican colleagues defend the indefensible, people need to think about that. Not just lawyers, most people aren't experts in the Geneva Conventions and the laws of armed conflict, but they will get a visceral feel for what's going on when they see this video without question.
Is there nothing that Congress or the courts can do if the Secretary of Defense is committing illegal acts?
Well, so the good news is that on a bipartisan basis, the National Defense Authorization Act, what's known as the NDAA, which will be passed this week in the Congress, I don't know, tomorrow or the next day, does have a provision which cuts Pete Hegseth's travel budget if he doesn't turn over the videos. And the president, of course, has waffled on this. First, he said, yeah, we should release it. And now he says it's up to Pete Hegseth. You see the distancing game happening there, too. Look, I think there's a better than even chance that these videos get released because it is bipartisan. Much of the courage, of course, in the Republican side is over on the Senate side for reasons I don't fully understand. But I do think in the end, these things get released.
But you're as Allison said, you are the leading Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Who gave the order? Did Pete Hegseth commit a war crime, or was it Admiral Bradley? And to my knowledge, isn't there always a JAG officer in the room before that order is given?
Well, first of all, remember that when Pete Hegseth became Secretary of Defense, he fired the top 3 or 4 JAGs in the Pentagon, right? Now, why do you think he did that? These are people who are designed precisely to make sure that our military operates inside the law, and boom, they're fired, along with the women and, the African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And so, there's a reason why the JAGs were fired. And it's not just the firing of the JAGs, it's the message that sends, right? The message that sends is you do what I say or you will lose your job. And I'm really interested, to answer your question specifically. It's a little bit more of a complicated question from a legal standpoint than it appears on first blush, right? The president orders something of the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense issues orders. Then you have a senior commander who is Admiral Bradley in this case, who came before the Congress last week, who ultimately gives the order, right? And he gave the order in a room full of people. I don't know who was in that room, but presumably there were some legal minds in that room. And then you've got a chain of command right down to the guy who pulls the trigger, right? And there ought to be checks along the way. And what's super interesting to me here is I'd met Admiral Bradley for the first time last week. Anybody who has ever worked with him says that he's a deeply honorable man with a storied history in the military. But it is a study in what happens to honorable people when they're placed in a context, summarized best by Pete Hegseth, right? This guy who wrote a book saying that we are too beholden to the lawyers. We ought to just let the warriors, be more lethal. A guy who defended an individual who was convicted of, posing with the corpse of an enemy. I mean, this is the vibe that is coming down from the top, and very few people are so independently minded that they can resist that kind of culture and context and vibe.
It's funny you bring up Hegseth and the culture by which the military operates. This is Pete Hegseth in 2016. I really want you to hear this and then get your reaction.
And I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander-in-chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
What do you think, Congressman?
Just to be clear.
Oh my God. I mean, he said you shouldn't follow an unlawful order. He's a seditious traitor. He should probably be hung. Oh no, wait. That was Alyssa Slotkin. That was the Democrats in the Congress who said that. When they say it, it's a seditious act of treason. But when Pete Hegseth says it, well, it's okay. Look, this is just a demonstration of how, two things, right? Of how terribly unprincipled the political debate is, right? Because when Maggie Goodlander and Alyssa Slotkin and Jason Crow, all, veterans, say that you shouldn't follow an illegal order, it's sedition treason. But when Pete Hegseth says it, well, that's okay. But the other thing that shows is that Pete Hegseth knows what the truth is here, right? Which is that one of the reasons our military is as great as it is, apart from its lethality and its capability, is that it is honorable. It is honorable. That's a key part of the warrior ethos that, Pete Hegseth with his pull-ups and his push-ups and his lethality and his don't get fat, commands completely forgets. Honor and abiding by the law is really a critical part of our military. And you played that clip of him saying it.
It also shows what Pete Hegseth thought before he was in the thrall of Donald Trump. So that was before Donald Trump was, I think, Dave, am I right? Before he was the nominee even, right?
That was 2016.
Before he was president.
Before he was president.
Yeah. And so this is back when Pete Hegseth could think for himself, back when he wasn't a sycophantic tool. I mean,
yeah.
I'm just calling it like it is because that's what he really thought. and now he says something completely different. But Congressman, a couple of facts that I just want to get to. You had said that they struck these, drug traffickers. Do we know that? I mean, do we know they're not just fishermen? Because what's the evidence that's been presented that they're not just willy-nilly hitting fishing boats?
Yeah. So one of the big problems here, to the credit of the administration, better late than never, we got access to the legal opinion, which, by the way, I think is an insane legal opinion, but by which they say these strikes are legal. They have basically created a war, which is not a war. It's a non-international armed conflict, or a NIAC. A NIAC, as far as I can tell, is a war that is not a war. And the reason it's a war is because we're using a good chunk of American naval combat power and weapons and this sort of thing. But it's not a war because if it were a war, it would require authorization by the Congress of the United States. So the legal opinion says this is a war, but not a war. Secondly, they've given us operational briefings. And, the operational briefings are sort of interesting and sort of disturbing, but not that interesting, right? It turns out when you hit a motorboat with a big missile, bad things happen to the motorboat. What we haven't gotten is the briefing that is really critical on exactly the question you ask, Allison: the intelligence, the collection, the targeting. Who are we listening to? What degree of certainty do we have that there's drugs on the boat, that everybody on the boat is a trafficker, that there's not a spouse or something on the boat, or that the boat's not, in addition to moving drugs, moving maybe humans who are being trafficked? So we don't know the answer to any of those questions. But let me tell you this. Our intelligence community and our military intelligence is very, very good. They're very good. So I don't worry too much that the boats that have been struck, now I think the actions are illegal, to be clear, but I don't worry too much that they're striking innocent fishing boats here. However, I don't know that for sure because there hasn't been a briefing. And of course, mistakes are always made. Even by the best of people under the best of circumstances, mistakes get made. But I wouldn't spend too much time worrying that these boats right now are not carrying drugs. There's lots of other things to worry about.
Yeah, I think we can all agree Maduro would be the first one to suggest they're not drug dealers if in fact they were not. But I'm curious your thoughts on the CBS News had a poll on this, and 53% of the American public said they are in favor of these boat strikes on drug dealers. So what do you say to the 53% of Americans that say, why are we defending drug dealers who are, in fact, by definition, kind of mass murderers? They are killing Americans.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, right? I mean, I'm very aware of the fact that it's an unpopular position to say that we shouldn't execute people without any due process, which is what we're doing, right? You would probably find a meaningful percentage of Americans who would say, if you find a mass murderer, hang him and then get on with the trial, right? There's an emotional response. And drugs are obviously ravaging the United States of America. Tens of thousands of Americans lose their lives in overdoses. So I get the emotional response, but there's at least two answers to that question, or to that belief. Number one, what distinguishes us as a country is that we're not Russia. We're not Iran. We're not China. We believe in things like the principle that you're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And I understand how easily that gets overridden by just bloodlust. I get it. I really do. But that's the distinguishing feature of the United States. The other thing I would point out is that though we are a good people and a good nation, we don't abide by the laws of war simply because we're good. We do it because our troops need protection when they get captured. I asked the Admiral this last week. Imagine that the two people clinging to a piece of wood in the middle of the ocean were United States Navy sailors. And imagine that the video is taken by the Iranian military. And for whatever the time is, 40 minutes, the Iranian military watches these two American sailors clinging to a piece of wood and then wastes them. How do we feel about that? We'd go to war, right? We would go to war over that. And yet we're okay when the shoe is on the other foot. So look, it's a hard argument to make. And I understand that if I make the argument really well, I might sway a few people in the middle, but we are not a nation that simply walks up to criminals and executes them because it's emotionally satisfying. That's just not who we are.
Congressman, are you able to say if you're meeting with the Secretary of Defense soon to pose some questions to him?
So there is rumor of what's known as a Gang of Eight meeting happening today, and I don't know the topic or the attendees. In fact, I've been invited to the meeting, but that's pretty much all I know about it.
Do you believe that this is about drug trafficking? I mean, that's the party line from the administration.
Right.
But do you think that that's really why they're targeting fishing vessels or whatever, any kind of vessels off of Venezuela, or is something else going
Yeah.
on?
Yeah. No, look, I think I get the question a lot. And usually the question is this like a prelude to the invasion of Venezuela, right? No secret that the president, and certainly not the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, doesn't like Maduro. None of us like Maduro, right? He's an illegitimate ruler. Here's what I think. I think that the strikes on the boats are exactly what they are, performative, right? This is not a long-term way to stop the flow of cocaine. By the way, it's cocaine, right? I mean, the tens of thousands of Americans who are dying, most of them are dying from fentanyl. So we're not even going after the drug that is killing most Americans. All we're going to do, massive success here means that we stop boats. By the way, we're not going to do that either because we can't hit every boat. But if you stop all the boats, they're going to put the cocaine on planes. They're going to put the cocaine on the back of mules, and it's going to get here. So it's performative. It's satisfying. Like we were just talking about, it's emotionally satisfying to see a bunch of bad guys go up in a big explosion. That's all that's happening. As an ancillary benefit, I would tell you, and I think the Secretary of State thinks this, hey, if it puts pressure on Maduro and the Venezuelan people decide they're going to take the guy out, that wouldn't be a bad thing to have happen. But I would still be very, very surprised if the United States engages in a military attack in Venezuela.
But that's the question, that why do we want Maduro out? You brought up the former Honduras president, which, by the way, this morning, Honduras put a warrant out for his arrest. This is the very man that President Trump pardoned who trafficked 400 tons of cocaine to the United States. Have you gotten an explanation as to why he was pardoned? And if you're going to have a war on drugs, how do you then pardon a man who trafficked 400 tons of coke to the United
It's
States?
just amazing, right? I mean, people have never heard of Hernandez, but I mean, one way to think about this is that we're like wasting the corner drug dealer who's standing on, a corner in the Bronx, but we're like pardoning Pablo Escobar. Explain that. There is. Look, all I can tell you is the president on Truth Social said, well, a bunch of people that I know told me it would be a good thing to do. My guess is it might have had something to do with trying to influence the Honduran presidential election, which was 2 weekends ago. But yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I think it's a fool's errand to try to make it sense. I'll tell you what, it sure as hell undercuts the argument that what we ought to really be doing is killing a bunch of low-level guys because, even without due process, while the president is pardoning the kingpin.
One last question about this, and then I know Dave wants to move on to a couple of other subjects. Hegseth is also ignoring federal law that requires info be sent to the Armed Services Committee within 15 days of a strike. So are you saying, Congressman, that he's doing unlawful things, I mean, demonstrably, and there is nothing, like, who will prosecute him? I know that the president won't get rid of him until the president decides he's going to get rid of him. But is there nothing that the courts, that Congress, that Americans can do about unlawful things being done by the Secretary of Defense?
Well, I think you're referring to the fact that he's required to send to Congress what is known as the exords, the execution orders for a military strike, and that hasn't happened yet. So yes, technically he's in violation of that rule. But to your bigger question, what is the probability that if Congress were to hold Pete Hegseth in contempt because he's violating the rules? What happens with a contempt holding is that we go to the Department of Justice, which is currently run by one Pam Bondi, and say, we want you to prosecute this guy for contempt of Congress. The probability of that happening is the same probability of me getting first round draft pick in the NFL. Ain't going to happen, right?
I think that's actually a bigger probability. The latter.
You're right. That may be true. So it ain't going to happen. But and here's the good news. Every once in a while, this sound asleep Congress like stirs its little toe a little bit. Like I told you in the NDAA, where in a bipartisan basis, we're going to cut off a chunk of Pete Hegseth's travel money if he doesn't turn over the videos. So particularly on the Senate side, every once in a blue moon, you have some Republicans who will say, hey, this is beyond the pale, and we're actually going to use the tools we have, like where the money goes, to try to force something. Right now, I think that's the only tool. It's a tool that the president denies, and it's a tool that the Republicans, by and large, don't want to use. But it's, at this point, all we've got, apart from public shaming.
Also of interest to the Intelligence Committee is this Ukraine peace deal that your colleague, Chris Murphy, the senator here in Connecticut, calls a business deal that sells out Ukraine. President Trump, meanwhile, is calling for elections in Ukraine and suggesting that they give away land, much of which is not controlled by Russia. What do you make of this Ukraine peace deal? Is it in fact selling out Ukraine, and why would the president want to do so?
Well, it's not selling out Ukraine. It's requiring Ukraine to surrender, right? This deal would give Putin so much more than he could get at the end of any war, right? Including land that he hasn't yet conquered. And remember, I'll make up a number here, but for every mile that guy takes, he loses 2,000 soldiers, right? So there's a massive gift of land. There's the acceptance that they get to keep Crimea. They get to tell Ukraine what its military can do. They forbid Ukraine. I mean, it's a surrender document, full stop. And I guess Donald Trump likes it for two reasons. Number one, as you point out, the whole world is seen as a realm for he and his people to do business. And it's hard to do business when you have a, a brutal land war underway. And number two, he promised when he was running for office that he would end this war on the first day in office. Well, here we are, what are we, 11 months in, and it has resisted his ability to end it on day one. So I think that ticks him off. And of course, the man wants a Nobel Peace Prize. So I think you wrap those three things together and you see why he's basically saying to the Ukrainians, you surrender. You surrender. In any normal world, the way you would end this thing is by giving Ukraine the leverage to force a decent deal, right? We would be sending a lot more munitions to Ukraine. We would be telling Russia not, maybe you didn't do this, maybe you didn't. We'd be telling Russia, we are in this fight until the last man goes down. And then the Russians would say, oh my God, we better strike a deal. But of course, the president has taken the exact opposite approach, pounding on the weaker party, removing their leverage because he wants them to surrender to Russia.
We know you have to go soon, so we'll do a bit of a lightning round, or just to get a few big issues in. Epstein files, they have to be released by December 19th. What are we going to see in those? What's the public going to say?
In the context of all that we're talking about, like Congress's power to make war, whether we should kill people without due process, whether we ought to invade a country, man, I'll tell you, Epstein is like item number 1,000 I want to talk about. There's a lot of Democrats who are riding that horse because it is so damaging to the MAGA coalition. Look, Epstein was obviously a horrible, horrible person. I have no idea what's in the files. There's a tendency around here to wish cast, right? Like, oh my God, there's going to be photographs of Donald Trump on an island with, Jeffrey Epstein and young cheerleaders or whatever. All you do when you do that is raise expectations. And when the truth comes out, it rarely meets those expectations. So we'll see. I have no idea.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, as we continue our lightning round, she continued to speak out against the president in a 60 Minutes interview, was very critical of him. In fact, pointing out how ironic it is that he called her a traitor after welcoming MBS and many others into the Oval Office. She has resigned. Or how many other Marjorie Taylor Greenes are there in the Republican Party? And what do you make of her staunch reversal?
Yeah. I'm sorry to say I made a very serious point to not encounter Marjorie Taylor Greene in the years that she was here. I just wasn't all that interested in Jewish space lasers and, venomous politics. So I can't give you a lot of insight into the woman. But I will tell you this, what's interesting to me about her is that she seems to actually be real MAGA. Why do I say that? The president, if you sum up in one sentence what Donald Trump ran on, he ran on the idea that I'm going to address your problems, America, which was chiefly the cost of groceries, the cost of your electricity, and I'm not going to get involved abroad. No crazy wars, right? This is what the deep state wants. And instead, he's done the exact opposite of that, right? We're hearing about Ukraine. We just spent the last 30 minutes talking about Ukraine and Venezuela and the Middle East and bombing Iran. He has done nothing but act abroad. And what's happening here at home? Groceries are getting more expensive. Electricity prices are going up because of tariffs, because of the shutdown of New Generation. So she's actually original MAGA. She's back to this notion of, hey, let's focus on the well-being of Americans and not get involved in all this stuff abroad, as the president does the exact opposite thing. So kudos to her, because she's actually got the cojones to call him on it. The rest of the Republicans here are like, oh, well, I haven't actually read the email that he sent out. I haven't seen the speech. Marjorie Taylor Greene is at least acting in a principled way here from a MAGA standpoint.
I would put Nancy Mace in the MTG category in some matter of speaking. She wrote a piece in the New York Times entitled, "What's the Point of Congress?" She says she's learned the system in the House promotes control by party leaders over accountability and achievement. No one can be held responsible for an action so far too little gets done. She calls Nancy Pelosi the most effective House leader in a century. And she called on the Republicans to pass healthcare legislation and border legislation Do you agree with her on her assessment of the House, and what's the point of Congress today?
I do. I do. I mean, I think on that list of things you listed there, I think I agree with her on just about everything. Yeah, it's really frustrating. I mean, for decades around here, and this is the subject of another 30-minute podcast, for decades around
Yep.
here, the Congress has sort of given up an awful lot of its authority and power and has concentrated power in the leadership. That was true on both sides of the aisle, by the way. And now the innovation, now that Donald Trump is president, is the Republicans are completely giving up any authority or privilege or prerogative that the Congress has. If the president wants to steal our power of appropriations, no problem. If the president wants to go to war without our permission, no problem. And so she's absolutely right about that.
My last question for you, Congressman, is that Democrats, particularly right now, you hear them saying, like, I see cracks in MAGA. There's fissures forming. Donald Trump is losing it. Maybe it's his health. Maybe it's his mental health. Maybe it's, his base. It's the economy. That, Donald Trump is falling. Is that just wishful thinking? Is that really happening?
No, I don't think it is wishful thinking. I think it's true. I see it every day here. I see it in the venom and the warring factions in the Republican Party for the reasons that we've been talking about. What I'm much more interested is less kind of the health of MAGA as I am in the ability to politically beat this awful, awful group of people. And, rewind 4 weeks ago to the election, and there wasn't a spot in the United States of America where the electorate didn't come screaming back to the Democratic Party, right? Most recently in Tennessee, whereas a district that Trump won by 22 points was won by the Republican by 8 or 9 points. So what you see is the American people saying, I've had enough. I want to focus on affordability. I don't want the chaos even in deep red areas. That's the bit that I'm interested in because it means that we've got an opportunity in 2 and then in 4 years to reverse some of this madness.
But wouldn't you like to be able to say, here's what we did on affordability? We all know inflation was a disaster under President Biden.
Yep. We completely mishandled the inflation thing under Biden. We completely mishandled immigration under Biden. Mea culpa, mea culpa. It's like what they say about Alcoholics Anonymous. The first thing to do is to admit you have a problem. We had a huge problem, right? And as a result, the American people looked at us, a year ago and said, "You guys get nothing. You don't get a House majority. You don't get a Senate majority. You don't get the White House. You get nothing." We should learn from that, but the American people also need to remember that in their decision to do that, they gave us no tools. So we're not in a position right now to fix electricity prices or grocery prices. So we need to learn from the catastrophe around inflation in the Biden administration when we do have another opportunity to actually stop the silliness, set aside Epstein and all the other things that are shiny things out there and actually start doing the things you do to make healthcare and energy and other stuff cheaper for the American people.
All right, one more quick one on the Intelligence Committee, and then we'll end on some levity. The administration made a deal with China. 25% of these new high-tech chips that NVIDIA sells, they can now sell to China. We get a 25% cut. I have always been a fiscal conservative. I'm struggling with what the hell fiscal conservatism means when we're taking 25% of essentially ownership of an American company. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's one of these things that you just can't make up, right? I mean, 2 Fridays ago, there was a long 2-hour debate on the floor of the House of Representatives about the horrors of socialism, right? What is socialism? The definition of socialism is the government owning the means of production. Donald Trump has forced 10 or 11 different companies from U.S. Steel to Intel to now NVIDIA to basically take an ownership to allow the United States government to own a stake in the company. This is the most socialist thing we've seen in a very long time. By the way, it's also a really bad idea. These H200 chips that are now going to start flowing to China so that the president can, get a quote deal done are actually going to accelerate China's ability to build better fighter jets, to do better AI, and that's going to come back to bite us. No question.
All right,
Dave, what's
go
our
ahead.
levity? What did you plan for levity?
I know the congressman would love to congratulate the president on a recent award that he won.
Right, FIFA.
And I want to show you first. I mean, we should all congratulate the president on this one. So listen.
Please welcome the very first winner of the FIFA Peace Prize, the 45th and 47th President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald J. Trump. Please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is your prize. This is your Peace Prize. There is also a beautiful medal for you that you can wear everywhere you want to go.
I'm going to wear it right now.
Okay, let me hold. Fantastic. Excellent.
Do you have any congratulations to the president on his medal?
All I want to say is that, you know, if FIFA is awarding peace prizes, I just think it's really important that the Nobel Committee in Scandinavia develop a Maradona Prize for excellence in soccer offense. That's what I'm waiting for.
You know, Congressman, when there's a reality show or a sitcom and there's one really, really cringy character, and at home you have a visceral reaction to like the cringe, that's how I feel when I watch that. It's so embarrassing to watch somebody be so thirsty for something.
Yep. And to have powerful people abandon all principle and dignity by engaging in abject flattery. You know?
It felt like Veep, that great show Veep. It just felt like a clip straight out of fiction.
Totally.
It was,
Totally.
it was rather hysterical.
Well, Congressman, thank you. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for covering so many issues with us. It's really helpful to get
Absolutely.
real information here on Sanity.
Okay.
So
Anytime. Thanks, everyone.